They're telling you that they make us in their image. And as we saw before, they're not above also co-opting all those frustrations and inner anxieties. They're definitely speaking to the primitive mind, the reptilian brain, the limbic centers of the brain. They know how to even co-opt that, as we saw in various films that go to exploit the fact that man is pent up and angry and frustrated and needs to vent it in order to offset total breakdown and psychosis. Joel Buchan says that the work of Melanie Klein with children seems to show that from an extremely early age or early stage of development, two emotions arise which have the greatest possible relevance to our later responses to social stimuli and remain very persistent throughout life. These are anxiety and guilt, upon both of which propagandists constantly play. And in fact, I've said so many times that if we didn't have an unconscious, we probably wouldn't have these problems. They're not appealing to our conscious minds. They're appealing to the subconscious mind. And if we are not immune in our consciousness, then we have no way to defend ourselves against this pestilence. Another advertisement here, playing on exactly that, says, maybe I'm a bit of a perfectionist, yet every time I have a Haagen-Dazs, I lose control. So again, this is catering to man's weakness, which is Satanism, isn't it? What more definition of Satan could you imagine than somebody who plays to your weaknesses and turns those into virtues? As a matter of fact, a true perfectionist wouldn't be seen dead eating this kind of food or listening to any of these types of advertisements. Jean Kilbourne says that the self-esteem of girls plummets as they reach adolescence, partly because they cannot possibly escape the message that their bodies are objects, and imperfect objects at that. Boys learn that masculinity requires a kind of ruthlessness or even brutality, and therefore violence becomes inevitable. But yes, violence to others becomes inevitable, but what about violence to the self? The first victim of all of this is one's own self, and that's the point of all of this, is to create a very self-sadistic creature. So the violence that we see in the world around us, the violence that we do to each other, is only a symptom. It's not the cause. Dan Cook, the assistant professor of advertising and sociology at the University of Illinois, says that linking one's sense of self to the choices offered by the marketplace confuses personal autonomy with consumer behavior. Well, that's the social persona, the collectivist's dream. You shouldn't even be having, these individuals don't even believe you have a self. They only acknowledge that social persona and cater to it exclusively. Daniel Goleman goes on to say that as of 2000, USA Today reports on its front page that 6.6 million adults, that's 3% of the adult population, are in prison or correction. No other society has ever done so deadly a thing to its people and on such a scale. Jean Kilbourne says that addiction is the #1 health problem in America today. Many people feel that addiction is also at the root of other problems, such as crime, poverty, divorce, child abuse, and other forms of violence. Others argue that it is these problems that lead to the addiction. Well, philosophers have said that even thinking is an addiction. A person's understanding of themselves, or the addiction, as we said, to that social persona, the approvals of other people. Where does the addictions end? Because obviously you have to question that most of us would agree with these commenters and social critics. Most of us, if asked, would say, yes, we deplore what's going on. But how many people are really standing up against it? Do we know what to replace it with? Do we know why it comes into existence? We may react, but do we know how to respond positively to all of this? In the McDougall report, she says that each year in the UK, more than 24,000 teenagers are admitted to hospital after deliberately harming themselves. But only a small proportion, around 13%, of self-harm episodes are thought to result in a hospital visit. Previous small-scale research found that people who were self-harmed were more anxious, depressed, and had lower self-esteem than those who don't. Daniel Goleman goes on to say that heroin and cocaine use among white youth climbed about 300% over the 2 decades before the 1990s. For African American youth, it jumped to a staggering 13 times the rate of 20 years before. The frequency of eating disorders in teenage girls has skyrocketed. Well, what can you do when the advertising agents and the ad copy is appealing directly not only to that authentic self? I mean, they're speaking to the pseudo-self. But then knowing that we crave wholeness, most of the advertisements, or a good deal of the advertisements, also try to cater to that unexpressed voice. Here the Virginia Slims motto is find your voice. Bring romance back into my life. Be ready for the dawning of a new day. So again, they're talking about something authentic. First having removed it, first having helped to remove the real authentic thing from us, then they present it back to us through a product or through an advertisement. That's why we're so addicted to this. And Goldman goes on to say that while any of these problems in isolation raises no eyebrows, taken as a group, they are barometers of a sea change, a new kind of toxicity seeping into and poisoning the very experience of childhood, signifying sweeping deficits in emotional competences.